At 7:15 on December 7, 1944, Second Lieutenant Leonard Lammel crouched behind a stone wall in the Bergstein Cemetery, surveying a snow-blanketed field toward Hill 400, observing German machine gunners repositioning in their pillboxes 400 yards distant. 24 years old, veteran of Pointe du Hoc on D-Day, he commanded what remained of Dog Company, 2nd Ranger Battalion, in an assault that 4 full divisions had previously failed to accomplish. The Germans had transformed Hill 400 into a stronghold, with an observation post at the peak, reinforced bunkers, and interlocking zones of fire. From that high ground, they could monitor every American movement in the Roer Valley below every vehicle, every tank, every soldier crossing exposed terrain. The 9th Infantry Division had attempted to capture it in September, suffering 4,500 casualties for a 3 kilometers gain. The 28th Division attacked in November, losing 6,000 men with no ground secure. The 4th Infantry Division shed another 6,000 troops in the first week of December. The 5th Armored Division sent tanks at the hill 3 days ago. German 88mm artillery destroyed them before they reached the tree line. Now, the Rangers were tasked with what thousands of regular infantry could not achieve: 120 men from Dog and Fox companies. Without tank support or additional artillery beyond what 1st Army could spare, just Rangers, their rifles, and a plan relying on speed to offset limited numbers, Lammel had led a reconnaissance patrol at 0300 that morning, crawling to within 200 yards of the German emplacements, counting pillboxes, and noting machine gun positions. Intelligence indicated the hill was defended by the 980th Grenadier Regiment, part of the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division. Experienced soldiers, well equipped, entrenched in positions they had fortified for weeks. Behind Lammel, Captain Otto Mosny, 6'3", and commanding Fox Company, moved along the line, inspecting weapons and adjusting ammunition belts. The Rangers had been transported forward from their bivouac area the previous night, arriving at Bergstein at 0200, then marching 2 miles through freezing rain to reach assault positions. The plan was straightforward. Dog Company would attack the right flank of the hill, Fox Company the left, while Easy Company remained in Bergstein as reserve. The Rangers had to traverse 400 yards of open terrain, ascend the 45 slope, seize the bunkers at the summit, and hold against whatever the Germans could muster. Lammel understood the risk. At Pointe du Hoc, the Rangers had scaled 90-foot cliffs under fire, losing 30% of their assault force in the first hour, and held the position for 2 days against counterattacks. Every Ranger and Dog Company remembered that engagement, and every man knew this mission would be more brutal. The temperature was 28 F, the ground frozen solid. Excavating foxholes at the summit would be nearly impossible. The hill was dense with fir trees, and German artillery would airburst above the canopy, turning the forest into a deadly field of shrapnel and wood splinters. A T-0725. The American artillery barrage commenced. 18 batteries, 105mm howitzers, 155mm guns, and 240mm shells fired in succession. The bombardment crept up the hill in stages, starting at the base and advancing toward the peak. The sound was relentless, the ground trembling with each impact. Lammel observed the destruction in the morning twilight: trees splintering, bunkers taking direct hits. The barrage would suppress the defenders but not eliminate them. Concrete and earth could endure artillery. Machine guns would still await them on the slope. A T-0728. The fire shifted to the summit exclusively. That was the signal. Lammel glanced to left and right, seeing Rangers affixing bayonets and double-checking grenades. The assault would begin in 2 minutes. 400 yards of exposed terrain awaited, with German machine guns trained on every step. Lammel touched the Thompson submachine gun slung across his chest, 30-round magazine, 2 extras on his belt, 4 fragmentation grenades carrying the same kit he had at Pointe du Hoc. A T-0730. Captain Mosny rose behind the cemetery wall. The Rangers surged from cover, 120 men advancing in 2 waves across snow-covered ground. No battle cries, no shouting. just boots crunching frozen earth and the distant roar of artillery striking the summit. Lammel led the first wave. The plan relied on speed, cross the field before the German gunners recovered from the bombardment, reach the tree line, and ascend the slope before the enemy could regroup. At 150 yards, the first German machine gun opened fire, MG-42, 500 rounds per minute. The gunner had survived the artillery, remaining at his post in a bunker near the hill's base. Tracers cut through the dawn light. Rangers dropped some hit, some taking cover, but the formation pressed on. Lammel saw Private William Anderson fall 30 yards to his left, Sergeant Ed Sear dive behind a slight rise, and Fox Company under fire from a second machine gun on their flank. What should have been a 2-minute crossing stretched to 4. Every second gave the Germans time to man their weapons. At 200 yards, German mortars fell 81 rounds aimed at preset coordinates in the field. The first salvo fell short. The second landed closer. Rangers kept moving. Doctrine was clear. Standing still meant death. Forward movement meant survival. Private Kenneth Harsh took shrapnel to the face at 100 yards, but kept running, blood streaming down his neck. A replacement soldier froze, curling into a ball. Lammel witnessed it, but pressed forward, leading the assault relentlessly. Lieutenant Ken McClure led his platoon on the left flank, sustaining a bullet through his right leg at 75 yards. He dropped to one knee, but continued directing his men toward gaps in German fire, refusing to leave the field until every man passed him. At 50 yards from the tree line, Captain Mosny absorbed a round through his shoulder, but continued forward, blood soaking his field jacket. He had led Fox Company through training, Sicily, Salerno, and Normandy. The Rangers reached the tree line at 0733, 3 minutes after leaving the cemetery wall. They had crossed 400 yards under direct fire, losing 14 men killed or wounded. Survivors dispersed into the trees, taking cover behind trunks and fallen logs, catching their breath for 30 seconds as German mortars continued to fall behind them. Lammel surveyed the slope, a 45 incline, 400 feet vertical, dense with firs and German positions. He could see the first line of bunkers 60 yards up, and hear German troops shouting orders. The artillery had shifted to the summit, leaving the midsection exposed to small unit tactics, fire teams of 3 or 4 men coordinating the climb. Lammel gathered his platoon of 32 Rangers and pointed uphill. They had trained for this in Scotland, England, and France. The method was brutal yet simple. Grenades first, bayonet second. At T0735, Dog Company began the ascent. Fox Company moved parallel to their left. The frozen ground made footing treacherous. Rangers gripped tree trunks for leverage, pulling themselves upward. German machine guns erupted from the bunkers above, rounds snapping through trees, bark exploding, wood splinters filling the air. Private Anderson reached a German bunker 70 yards up, spotting a firing aperture aimed downhill. He pulled 2 fragmentation grenades, yanked the pins, hurled both through the opening, and ducked behind a tree. The grenades detonated. The machine gun fell silent. Sergeant Rod Petty led Fox Company's assault on the left flank, veteran of Pointe du Hoc. His squad moved in bounds, 1 man providing covering fire while 3 advanced. They reached the concrete pillbox at 80 yards. Steeldor Petty pulled his Browning automatic rifle, shoved the muzzle through the firing slit, emptied a 20-round magazine into the interior. At 100 yards up the slope, the Rangers encountered wire. Triplic insertion stretched between trees, blocking the direct route to the summit. German engineers had placed it where terrain funneled attackers. The wire forced a choice: go around and expose flanks, or cut through and become stationary targets. L chose through, pulled wire cutters from his pack, started cutting. Sergeant Tom Ruggiero provided covering fire. The wire was thick, military grade. Each strand took 15 seconds to cut. German mortars started falling on their position. 81mm rounds. Air burst in the trees. Shrapnel rained down. A ranger behind L screamed, took metal through his back, fell forward against the wire. L kept cutting, got through the first belt, started on Thieskamp. His hands were numb from cold. A German grenade landed 5 feet away. Lal dropped behind a log. The grenade detonated, wood splinters embedded in his field jacket. He stood up, kept cutting. At 0748, 18 minutes after the assault began, Dog Company broke through the wire, reached the final 100 yards to the summit. They could see the observation tower now, could see German troops moving between positions. And from above, they could hear something that changed everything. Diesel engines, grinding gears. Thiegermans were moving armor onto Hill 400. The Rangers reached the summit at 0835, 1 hour and 5 minutes after leaving the cemetery wall. They had climbed through machine gun fire, mortar barges, and triple belts of concertina wire. Now, they stood on top of Hill 400, the highest point in the Ruhr Valley, 1,322 feet above sea level. And the Germans were not gone. The observation tower stood 50 yards ahead, 3-story wooden structure, concrete base. From its top level, German artillery observers could see 15 miles in every direction, could direct fire on every American position in the valley. The tower was the key to the entire German defensive line. Private Anderson was the first ranger to reach the main bunker at the summit. Steel door closed. He could hear movement inside. German voices, boots on concrete. Anderson kicked the door. It did not move. He stepped back, pulled a grenade, cooked it for Twoscons, threw it against the door. The grenade bounced, rolled back toward Anderson. He dove behind a fallen tree. The grenade detonated 15 feet away. Shrapnel tore through his right side. He died before Captain Maines reached his position. Lammel arrived at the bunker 30 seconds later, saw Anderson's body, saw the steel door still closed. German machine gun fire was coming from firing ports on both sides of the structure. Lel pulled his Thompson, moved along the bunker wall, reached the firing port, shoved the muzzle through, emptied the magazine. 30 rounds in 4 seconds. The machine gun inside fell silent. Captain Mosny arrived with 6 Rangers from Fox Company. His shoulder was still bleeding. He ignored it, pointed at the bunker door. 2 Rangers placed satchel charges against the hinges, pulled the fuses, ran back 20 yards. The charges detonated. The door collapsed inward. Rangers rushed through, found 12 German soldiers inside. 8 dead from Lammel's Thompson fire, 4 wounded. The wounded were disarmed and moved outside. By 0840, the Rangers held the summit. They had captured 28 German prisoners, killed approximately 40 more, lost 16 Rangers killed in the assault, another 23 wounded. That left 81 Rangers on top of Hill 400. 81 men to hold 1,300 feet of hilltop against whatever the Germans sent next. El knew the Germans would counterattack. That was doctrine. German commanders did not surrender terrain without attempting to retake it. The question was when and with what force. The diesel engines they had heard during the climb suggested armor, probably self-propelled guns, maybe tanks. That will be a problem. Rangers carried no anti-tank weapons heavier than bazookas, and bazookas were effective only at close range against frontal armor. The ground at the summit was frozen. El tried to dig a foxhole with his entrenching tool, got through 2 in of topsoil before hitting frozen earth. The tool bounced off. Digging was impossible. The Rangers would have to use existing German positions, bunkers, fighting holes, whatever the defenders had prepared. That meant defending from fixed positions instead of creating new ones. Lieutenant Howard Kettle Hunt arrived at 0850, forward observer, 56th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. He carried a radio and 2 enlisted men. His job was to coordinate all artillery support for the Rangers on the hill. Kettle Hunt climbed into the observation tower, set up his radio on the second level, began calling in defensive fire coordinates to every artillery battery in range. At 0900, Mul conducted a quick reconnaissance of their position. The hilltop was roughly oval, 400 yards long, 200 yards wide, covered with damagetries and shell craters from the American barrage. The Rangers occupied positions along the forward crest, facing south and southeast. That was the direction German counterattacks would come from. The reverse slope offered some protection from direct fire, but was exposed to German artillery positions in the valley. Sergeant Edsier gathered ammunition from German positions, found 3 MG-42 machine guns, 15,000 rounds of belted ammunition, 20 stick grenades. The Rangers redistributed the ammunition. Each man took extra magazines, extra grenades. They had learned at Point du Hoc that ammunition determined how long you could hold a position. At 9:15, German artillery began falling on hill for 105 mm guns. The first salvo landed on the southern slope. The second hit summit. The rounds airburst in the damaged trees. Shrapnel screamed through the air. A ranger near L took metal through. His helmet dropped without a sound. L dragged him into a bunker. The man was dead. The artillery barrage lasted 10 minutes, continuous, devastating. The Germans were using fire missions that had been pre-registered on the hilltop. They knew every coordinate, every distance, every elevation. The Rangers huddled in whatever cover they could find. Bunkers, shell craters, behind fallen trees. The barrage killed 3 more Rangers, wounded 5. At 09:30, the artillery stopped. That was the signal. Looked down the southern slope through the smoke and debris. Saw movement in the treeny 300 yards below. Saw German infantry forming up. Saw officers directing troops into assault formations. He counted approximately 150 men. They were coming up the same route the Rangers had just climbed. The first German counterattack began at 09:35. 150 infantry from the 654th Grenadier Regiment. They moved up the southern slope in 3 waves, 50 men per wave, 20 yards between waves. Standard German assault doctrine. The first wave would draw fire. The second would exploit gaps. The third would consolidate anti-Brachthruff. L had positioned his Rangers along the forward crest. 30 men from Dog Company on the right, 25 from Fox Company on the left. The rest were in reserve positions or manning the captured German bunkers. Every man had clear fields of fire down the slope. Every man knew to hold fire until the Germans reached 100 yards. Lieutenant Kettle Hutt watched the German assault from the observation tower. Called grid coordinates to the 56th Armored Field Artillery Battalion. 3 batteries responded. 18 guns, 105 Maumwitzers. Kettle Hutt adjusted fire, walked the barrage down the slope to heat off the advancing Germans. The first salvo landed at 200 yards, the second at 150. The German first wave reached 150 yards, kept climbing. The artillery hadn't stopped them. Rangers opened fire. 30 M1 Garens, 3 Browning automatic rifles, 2 captured MG-40s. The combined firepower tore through the advancing troops. Germans dropped, some hit, some seeking cover behind trees. The wave staggered, slowed, kept coming. At 100 yards, Rangers threw grenades. Fragmentation grenades rolled down the slope, detonated among the German troops. The explosions created gaps in the salt line. German officers shouted orders, tried to maintain formation. The second wave was already climbing through the casualties of the first. Sergeant Sear fired his Browning automatic rifle in short bursts. 5 rounds. Shift target. 5 rounds. Conserving ammunition, hitting center mass. He had learned on D-Day that sustained fire burned through magazines too quickly, that aim shots killed more than spraying bullets. His bar accounted for 7 Germans in the first 2 minutes of the fight. The German second wave reached 75 yards, split into 2 groups, tried to flank the Ranger positions on both sides. Lammel saw the maneuver, shifted 5 Rangers to cover the right flank. Sear moved 3 men to the left. The flanking attempts ran into concentrated fire. Germans went down. The Survivor stretchered back down the slope. At 09:42, 7 minutes after the counterattack began, the German assault broke. The remaining troops withdrew down the hill, left their dead and wounded on the slope, disappeared into the treeny below. The Rangers had held, but the cost was visible. 4 more Rangers dead, 7 wounded. That left 70 Rangers combat effective on the hilltop. 70 men against whatever came next. L knew this was only the first attempt. German doctrine called for repeated counterattacks, each one stronger than the last, each one better coordinated. The first attack had been hasty, poorly supported. The next would be different. The Germans would bring more artillery, more troops, possibly armor. At 0950 will conduct another ammunition count. Each Ranger had an average of 40 rounds remaining for their M1. The bar gunners had 2 magazines each. The captured German machine guns had approximately 3,000 rounds total. Grenades were running low. Each man had 1 or 2 left. The ammunition situation was becoming critical. Captain Mosny gathered the Rangers at 0. His shoulder wound had stopped bleeding, but his left arm was useless. He used his right hand to point down the slope. Explained what the Rangers already knew. The Germans would come again, probably within the hour. This time in greater numbers, this time with better support. The Rangers needed to prepare defensive positions, redistribute ammunition, identify fallback points if the Germans broke through. Major George Williams arrived at the summit at 01015. Battalion Executive Officer. He had been with the reserve companies in Bergstein. Hardly fighting, climbed the hill to assess the situation. Saw the Ranger casualties. Saw the ammunition situation. Saw 70 exhausted men holding a hilltop against an entire German regiment. Williams made a decision. He would request reinforcements from the 8th Infantry Division, but reinforcements would take hours. The Rangers would have to hold until then. At TO-10:30, German artillery began falling again, heavier than before, 155 guns. The rounds impacted across the entire summit. The Germans were saturating the hilltop, trying to kill Rangers before the next infantry assault. The barrage lasted 20 minutes, killed 2 more Rangers, wounded 4. The survivors pressed themselves into whatever cover existed, waited for the shells to stop falling. At 1050, the artillery ceased. Looked down the slope through the smoke, saw movement again. But this time, it was different. More troops, better organized, and behind the infantry he could see what the Rangers had feared. German armor, 3 self-propelled guns, probably Stoßalt guns, 75mm main weapons, thick frontal armor. Moving slowly up the southern approach. The second counterattack was coming, and the Rangers had no way to stop those guns. The second German counterattack began at 1100 hours, 200 infantry, 3 assault guns. The assault guns, stopped at 300 yards, positioned themselves to provide direct fire support for the infantry. Their 75mm guns could destroy any Ranger position with a single round, and the Rangers had only 2 bazookas. Sergeant James White commanded 1 bazooka team, 6 rounds total. He positioned himself behind a damaged bunker on the right flank, waited for the stews to close the distance. Bazooka effective range against armor was 150 yards maximum. Against frontal armor, closer was better. White needed the assault guns to climb within 100 yards before he could engage with any chance of penetration. The German infantry advanced in 4 waves, this time, 50 men per wave. Better spacing than the first attack. They moved through the trees using cover. Officers controlled the advance with whistle signals. The assault was methodical, professional, the kind of attack that veteran troops execute after learning from initial failures. Lieutenant Kettle Hutt called for artillery at 250 yards. 8 batteries apprended this time. First Army had recognized the importance of Hill 400. Every available gun in range was being directed to support the Rangers. The artillery barrage landed ahead of Thiegerman advance. 105mm shells. 155mm shells. The explosions tore through the trees, created a wall of fire and shrapnel between the Rangers and the attackers. But the Germans kept coming, walked through the barrage, took casualties, closed the distance. At 200 yards, they went to ground, began returning fire. German machine guns opened up front positions in the Trini. Mortar rounds started falling on the summit. The Germans had learned they were suppressing Ranger positions before advancing further. The 3 Stu assault guns moved forward, reached 200 yard, began firing high explosive rounds at Ranger bunkers. The first round hit the observation tower, blew out the second level. Kettle Hutt and his radio operator were thrown against the wall. Both survived. The radio was destroyed. Kettle Hut climbed down from the tower, found another radio from a dead ranger, began calling coordinates again. Sergeant White watched the lead stow advance to 150 yards. He aimed his bazooka at the front glacis plate. Knew the odds. Bazooka could penetrate 60 mm of armor at that range. Stu frontal armor was 80 mm. The round would probablybens, but White had no choice. He fired. The rocket streaked downhill, hit the upper glacis, detonated. The armor held. The Stug stopped, traversed its gun toward White's position, fired. The 75 mm round hit the bunker wall 2 feet from White. The concussion knocked him unconscious. The second bazooka team engaged the trailing stow, hit the side armor, penetrated. The assault gun brewed up. Flames erupted from the engine compartment. The crew bailed out. Rangers shot them as they ran. The burning Stug blocked that trail. The other 2 assault guns could not advance past it. They reversed, moved back down the slope. The German infantry lost their armored support. At 11:15, the German infantry waves were at 100 yards. Rangers opened fire. Every weapon on the hilltop. M1 rifles, Browning automatic rifles, captured MG-42s, Thompson submachine guns. The volume of fire was devastating. Germans dropped by the dozen, but they kept coming. The second wave reached 75 yards. The third wave was climbing through the dead of the first. Saw German troops rechink the wire that the Rangers had cut during the assault. Saw them spreading out along the same defensive line the Germans had used that morning. Saw officers organizing for a final rush. The Germans had crossed 200 yards under artillery and rifle fire. They were not stopping. They were coming all the way. At 11:20, the German fourth wave reached 50 yards. Fixed bayonets prepared fourth final assault. Lammel looked left and right. Saw Rangers running low on ammunition. Saw wounded men still firing from their positions. Saw Sergeant Sear with blood running down his face from a shrapnel wound. The Rangers had held against 2 major counterattacks, but they were being ground down man by man, position by position. Captain Mosny was down, taken a second wound to the leg, still directing Fox Company from a shell crater. Major Williams was organizing the reserve Rangers, preparing for hand-to-hand fighting if the Germans broke through. Every Ranger on the hilltop understood what was happening. They were outnumbered, low on ammunition, exhausted, and the Germans were about to charge. At 11:22, Germanofficers blew their whistles. The fourth wave rose from cover. 100 German infantry charged the Ranger positions with fixed bayonets, and behind them, down the slope, Lammel could see more troops forming up. A fifth wave, a sixth. The Germans were committing Gevringthing. They had to retaking Hill for 100. The German fourth wave hit the Ranger line at 11 minutes 23 seconds and 100 milliseconds infantry with fixed bayonets. They came up the last 50 yards screaming. Rangers met them with rifle fire at point-blank range, 10 yards, 5 yards. Then it became hand-to-hand bayonets, rifle butts, entrenching tools. The kind of fighting that happened when ammunition ran out and men refused to retreat. Sergeant Ed Sear was firing his Browning automatic rifle when a German round hit the weapon, bent the barrel, made it useless. Secker dropped the bar, looked around his position, saw 2 dead German soldiers 5 t away. Both carried MP-40 submachine guns. Secker grabbed both weapons, 32-round magazines, both full. He stood up from his foxhole, started walking toward the advancing Germans, firing both MP-40s from the hip. The Germans saw Sear coming. 1 man, 2 enemy weapons, walking through their assault line, firing continuously. Some stopped. Some tried to shoot him. Sear kept walking, kept firing, emptied both magazines, dropped both weapons, picked up a German rifle from a dead soldier, kept fighting. The Rangers behind him saw what he was doing, rose from their positions, followed Sear forward. The German fourth wave broke, fell back under the unexpected counterattack, retreated down the slope, left 30 dead on the hilltop. The survivors ran. The Ranger counterattack pursued them 50 yards, then stopped. The Rangers were too few, too exhausted, too low on ammunition to chase the Germans all the way down the hill. At 11:30, the second German counterattack was over. 200 German infantry had assaulted Hill 400. 140 were dead or wounded on the slopes. The survivors had withdrawn to the Trini below. The Rangers had held again, but the cost was devastating. 12 more Rangers dead, 15 wounded. That left 43 Rangers combat effective. 43 men holding 1,300 feet of hilltop. L conducted another ammunition count at 1140, average of 20 rounds per man. The bar gunners were down to their last magazines. The captured German Maschinagans had 1,000 rounds remaining. Grenades were gone. Most Rangers were down to their last 2 magazines. If the Germans attacked again with the same strength, the Rangers would run out of ammunition before the assault was repulsed. Major Williams gathered their remaining Rangers at 11:45, explained the situation. Reinforcements were being organized. The 8th Infantry Division was sending a company up the hill, but they would not arrive until late afternoon. The Rangers needed to hold for another 5 hours minimum. 5 hours against an enemy that had already demonstrated willingness to accept massive casualties to retake the hill. Captain Walter Bloch arrived at the summit at noon. Battalion surgeon. He had climbed from Bergstein with 2 medics. Brought medical supplies, morphine, bandages, sulfur powder. Bloch set up an aid station in one of the captured German bunkers, began treating wounded Rangers. 23 men with various wounds, shrapnel, bullets, burns from explosions. Bloch worked methodically, stabilized the critical cases, prepared the wounded for evacuation once reinforcements arrived. At 12:15, German artillery began falling again. The heaviest barrage yet, 155 guns, 240 mm guns. The Germans were using everything in range. The barrage lasted 30 minutes, saturated the entire hilltop. Trees that had survived the morning were cut down. Shell craters overlapped shell craters. The summit of Hill 400 became a moonscape of torn earth and shattered wood. Captain Bloch's aid station took a direct hit at 1,220.155 mm round penetrated the bunker roof, detonated inside. Bloch was killed instantly. Both medics were wounded. The medical supplies were destroyed. Few wounded Rangers inside were buried under collapsed concrete and timber. It took 20 minutes to dig them out. 3 more Rangers died from their wounds during the extraction. At 12:45, the artillery stopped, looked down the slope, expected to see another German assault forming. Saw nothing. The tree line was empty. No movement. No troops massing for attack. Just smoke and damaged forest. The silence was worse than the shelling. It meant the Germans were preparing something different. Lieutenant Kettle Hutt received a radio message at 1300 hours. German reinforcements were moving toward Hill 400. The 6th Parachute Regiment, Fallschirmjägers, elite troops, veterans of Korean Normandy, full battalion, 600 men. They were forming up in the valley. 3 Missouth, expected to reach Hill 400 by mid-afternoon. Field Marshal Walter Maud had personally authorized their deployment, had offered Iron Crosses and 2 weeks' leave to any soldier who participated in retaking the hill. Lummel gathered the remaining Rangers, 43 men most wounded, all exhausted, ammunition nearly gone. He explained what was coming. 600 elite paratroopers, the best infantry the Germans had against 43 Rangers who had been fighting for 6 hours straight. The math was brutal. The Rangers could hold against company strength attacks, maybe even battalion strength if they had ammunition. But 600 fresh Fallschirmjägers against 43 Depletedrangs was not a fight. It was mathematics. Major Williams asked the question every Ranger was thinking. Could they hold until reinforcements arrived? Looked at the ammunition situation, looked at the casualty count, looked at the men around him. He gave the only answer that made sense. They would find out. The 3rd German counterattack began at 1500 hours. 600 Fallschirmjäger from the 6th Parachute Regiment. They advanced in 6 waves, 100 men per wave, 50 yards between waves. The assault was coordinated with artillery, mortars, machine gun fire from supporting positions in the valley. This was not a hasty attack. This was a deliberate operation by elite troops who knew how to take fortified positions. Watch them come up the southern slope, green and tan camouflage smocks, the distinctive helmets of German paratroopers. They moved with discipline, used cover, advanced by bounds, one squad moving while another provided covering fire. These were not the Volksgrenadiers who had attacked that morning. These were professionals. The Rangers had prepared what defenses they could. 43 men spread across 400 yards of hilltop, every man in a fighting position, free position with clear fields of fire. Lammel had placed the remaining bar gunners at key points. The captured German machine guns were positioned to create interlocking fire. Every Ranger had been told the same thing. Fire only at targets inside 100 yards. Make every round count. Conserve ammunition until the last possible moment. Lieutenant Kettle Hutt called for artillery at 500 yards. Every battery in 1st Army range responded. The barrage was massive, continuous. The shells walked down the slope ahead of the advancing fall. Jaggers, but the paratroopers knew how to move through artillery. They went to ground during the heaviest concentrations, advanced during the gaps, used the terrain, took casualties, but kept coming. At 300 yards, the German artillery began counter battery fire, targeted the American gun positions in the valley, tried to silence the support that was keeping the Rangers alive. The American artillery fire slackened. Some batteries went silent. Others continued firing, but with reduced accuracy. The Germans were systematically eliminating the Ranger support. The first Folsom Jagger wave reached 200 yards at 1,515. Rangers opened fire. Every weapon. The Germans went to ground, returned fire. Their volume of fire was overwhelming. Machine guns, rifles, mortars. The Rangers were taking casualties from the sheer weight of German firepower. 2 Rangers died in the first minute. 3 more were wounded. The second wave moved through the first at 150 yards. The Germans were leapfrogging. Standard assault doctrine. Keep the defenders suppressed with continuous fire while advancing elements close the distance. The tactic was working. Rangers could not raise their heads to aim without taking fire. Sergeant Sear was hit again at 1,520. Shrapnel through his left shoulder. Heignerd kept firing his rifle. Had already gone through 2 dead Rangers' ammunition. Was down to his last 8 rounds around him. Other Rangers were in the same situation, calling out for munition, sharing magazines, taking rounds from the dead. At 1,525, Thiegerman third wave reached 100 yards. Rangers threw their last grenades. The explosions created gaps in the assault line, but the fourth wave was already moving through. The casualties. Thiegermans had numbers. They could absorb losses that would break a smaller force. They kept coming. Saw German paratroopers reaching the wire at 75 yards. Saw them cutting through. Saw officers directing troops to flank positions. The Germans were not charging blindly up the hill. They were maneuvering, looking for weak points in the Ranger line. And they were finding them. The Rangers simply did not have enough men to cover 400 yards of hilltop against 600 attackers. At 15:30, German squad broke through on the left flank. 10 falls from Jaggers. They had found a gap between Ranger positions where, moving along the reverse slope, coming up behind the Ranger line, Lommel saw them, grabbed 5 Rangers, led them to intercept. The 2 groups met in a shell crater, point-blank range. Lommel emptied his Thompson, killed 3 Germans. The other Rangers killed 4 more. The remaining 3 Germans retreated, but the breakthrough attempt showed how thin the Ranger defense had become. Major Williams was coordinating defense from the observation tower, was directing the few remaining Rangers to threatened positions, was trying to create a coherent defensive line from 43 exhausted men. At 1,535, he received a radio message. The reinforcements from the 8th Infantry Division were delayed. German artillery had hit the column on the approach road. The company would not reach Hill for 100 until evening, possibly not until after dark. Williams looked at the situation. 43 Rangers, most wounded, almost no ammunition, facing 600 elite paratroopers with no reinforcements coming for hours. He made a decision. The Rangers would hold their current positions as long as possible. When ammunition ran out, they would fight with bayonets. When that failed, they would use entrenching tools. The Rangers would not retreat. They would hold or die on Hill 400. At 1,540, Thiegerman 5th Wave reached 50 yards. Fixed bayonets prepared for the final assault. The 6th Wave was moving up behind them. Looked at his Thompson. 1 magazine. Left. 15 rounds. He looked at the Rangers around him. Saw men down to their last few rounds. Saw wounded men still in fighting positions. Saw exhaustion. Saw determination. The Germans were about to charge, and this time the Rangers might not have enough ammunition to stop them. At 1545, on December 7, 1944, the German 5th and 6th Waves charged the Ranger positions. 500 Fallschirmjägers with fixed bayonets. They came up the last 50 yards, firing from the hip. Rangers met them with their remaining ammunition, fired until magazines ran empty, then fixed their own bayonets. Lieutenant Kettle Hutt called for danger close artillery, gave coordinates that put the barrage within 50 yards of Ranger positions. The artillery batteries complied. Shells began landing among the charging Germans. The explosions tore through both sides. Germans died, Rangers died, but the barrage broke the German assault. The Fallschirmjägers could not advance through the wall of steel and explosives. They went to ground at 30 yards. Returned fire. Did not retreat but could not advance. For 2 hours, the battle became a stalemate. Germans at 30 yards. Rangers at 0. Both sides firing when targets appeared. Both sides taking casualties. The Germans tried to flank. Rangers shifted to block. Thiegermans brought up more ammunition. Rangers collected rounds from the dead. Neither side could gain advantage. Neither side would retreat. At 1730, as darkness began falling, the sound every Ranger had been waiting for arrived. American artillery increased. Not sporadic German fire, not harassment rounds. Concentrated barrages struck the southern slope, targeting German assembly points and support positions. First Army committed everything it could to the approaches of Hill 400. At 1800 hours, fresh U.S. troops appeared on the northern slope, an infantry company from the 8th Division. 200 men, fully supplied with ammunition. They advanced onto the hilltop, taking positions alongside the Rangers. The Germans saw the reinforcements and recognized their numerical advantage, slipping away. At 1815, the German forces withdrew, retreating down the southern slope, vanishing into the darkness and damaged woodland. The battle for Hill 400 had ended. The Rangers had held for 10.5 hours. Repelled 3 major counterattacks, fended off 600 elite German paratroopers with just 43 men, and retained control of the most critical terrain in the Roer Valley against everything the Germans could throw at them. The cost was evident across the hilltop. 23 Rangers killed, 86 wounded, and 4 missing. Of the 120 Rangers who had assaulted the hill that morning, only 11 remained combat-ready by nightfall. German losses were devastating, 412 dead on the slopes, an unknown number wounded and evacuated during the fighting, and 3 assault guns destroyed. The 6th Parachute Regiment had been effectively neutralized as a fighting force. Lieutenant Leonard Lammel was evacuated on December 8 with a concussion and shrapnel injuries to his arm. Before leaving, he walked the hilltop one last time, noting where Captain Block had fallen, where Private Anderson had died, and the positions where Rangers had held firm against impossible odds. Years later, when asked about D-Day, Lammel always gave the same answer: June 6th was not his longest day. December 7th, 1944, was his longest and most grueling day during 75 years of life. The Rangers were relieved by the 13th Infantry Regiment on December 9th and moved back to a bivouac area in the H region forest, immediately placed on alert for the next emergency. 9 days later, the Germans launched the Battle of the Bulge. The Rangers were sent to defend the northern shoulder, given no time to rest, and without full replacements. The 70 Rangers who survived Hill 400 would fight through the Ardennes, through the Rhineland, and into Germany itself. The Germans retook Hill 400 in late December during the opening stages of the Bulge. The 13th Regiment, exhausted from continuous combat, could not hold against the German counteroffensive. American forces would not recapture the hill until February 1945. By that time, however, the strategic situation had shifted. The Bulge had failed. The Germans were in retreat. Hill 400 no longer mattered strategically. What mattered was what the Rangers had proven, that small units with superior training could achieve what entire divisions could not, that determination and tactical skill could overcome numerical inferiority, that Americans could match and defeat elite German forces. Military historians would later call the defense of Hill 400 a textbook example of small unit leadership under fire. The hill was saved, they wrote, through intellect and bravery at the junior level. If this story inspired you, please hit that like button. Every like helps YouTube share this story with more people. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We are uncovering forgotten stories from dusty archives, everyday stories about Rangers who defended hills with courage and determination. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia? Our community spans the globe. You're not just a viewer, you're helping preserve these memories. Tell us your location and if anyone in your family served. Thank you for watching and for making sure Lieutenant Lamel and his Rangers are not forgotten. These men deserve to be remembered, and you are helping make that happen.